Excuse me, if I may interrupt for just a moment. Hi, I'm Janine Lauschat, and this is the 1070th edition of Motorsports Unlimited. Recent developments for the 2008 World of Wheels Car Show have prompted us to reach back some 13 years when we produced a program about the old O'Hare Stadium stock car track. It seems Harry Willett and some talented friends have decided to create an elaborate presentation at the 2008 World of Wheels show, featuring the artists in motorsport. We're going to be covering all of this in coming weeks, but for right now, all of this discussion reminded Bill of O'Hare Stadium and the artist who was an integral part of it, Dexter. Then he thought, I wonder how many remember O'Hare Stadium. Let's remind them.
Unlimited.
Clarence.
Let's start with a quiz. How many of you have heard Bill mention O'Hare Stadium? Now be honest, how many knew what he was talking about? Well, let's see. A few hands up there, but not very many. O'Hare Stadium was one of Chicagoland's premier motorsport facilities back in the 50s and 60s. It was located just south of O'Hare Airport at Mannheim Road. Still don't remember? Well, it's a piece of our history. It's something we think you should know a little bit about. On today's program, we're going to take you to the original location and explain. But first, the only girls have to find it.
Please remember, this material was shot 13 years ago. Hi, I'm May Chin, and I need to tell you, the Air Host Motel is no longer there.
This was directly across the street from the old O'Hare Stadium. As a matter of fact, I remember many folks parking down on this side street that wanted to avoid the parking charge for the parking lot. And Chuck, if you would, take your camera shot. Right down the street here, if it's just out of our camera shot, is O'Hare Airport, just to give an audience idea where it is. This is Mannheim Road. And Chuck, if you go further to the left, on the other side of the street, what we've got here is a big Ford truck dealership. That's what used to be the parking lot, or at least a part of it, I think, of the old O'Hare Stadium. You have to remember, I'm reaching back 30 years now for when O'Hare Stadium was here. The question that I have is, let's see if we can find a piece of the old racetrack and see if we can talk a little bit about this piece of history that I don't want to be lost. So let's go see if we can find it. Other side of Mannheim Road now. We just took our life in our hands to get here, and as you can see, we're talking industrial plaza, and that always makes me nervous about racetracks and losing racetracks to these things. So we've got to be getting closer to where O'Hare Stadium used to be. So let's continue our quest. Well, we've got Delta Parkway and Trans World Road here. Part of what was built when we lost the O'Hare Stadium facility on the property was a complex of flight kitchens and stuff that services O'Hare Airport, which is, again, you've seen the airplanes coming in and out, which is just over there. We can almost see it from here. But again, I don't see any of O'Hare Stadium yet. So let's continue our quest. As a matter of fact, if we come down here, Chuck, you can follow us along a little bit. You can see that what used to be our parking lot and somewhere the track was around here is all gone now, and we've got all industrial complex, part of which is flight kitchens and things like that. But I know that if we look hard enough, we can find where the track used to be. So let's continue our search. Girls, I can feel it. We're getting closer. Remember, I raced here for a number of years. We are getting closer.
Bill, how long did this track operate?
The track operated, we're going to find that all out today, but it was my recollection from about 1955 or 6 until about 1967 or 68, and we're going to find all that out today, but I am feeling good now because I think we're getting closer. Come on, I think we're going to find it now. Okay, I know that we're getting here now. This is almost it. The Northwest Ford truck dealership up front is where the parking lot used to be, and I know somewhere around here is where the track used to be.
Bill, what kind of track was this? Was it paved or dirt?
This was a quarter-mile bank paved track, and we're going to find all about that when we get in. Come on, let's go, because I know we're close now. Now, girls, I know that you will be happy to learn that the location where the old O'Hare Stadium was is now indoors. Stacy, you're glad to learn that?
Very.
Okay.
What kind of cars did they race here at O'Hare Stadium?
What they raced was stock cars, and we've got one of the biggest stars that they ever had at O'Hare Stadium here that's going to tell us all about it, but let's get inside because I'm sure you guys are cold. I can feel it, girls. We're getting closer and closer. I can almost smell the rubber and the high-octane fuels. Come on, we're getting there. I know we're getting closer, girls. I know we're getting closer. I can almost tell this is very much like the start of the races that we used to, you know, before the event started. And there's always that moment of excitement. We're getting there. Come on, let's go. Well, this is it, girls. This is my first visit to O'Hare Stadium in 30 years. Come on. It, girls, as near as we can determine, this is it. This is where the old O'Hare Stadium existed, right on this spot. Apparently, it has joined corporate America. Now, I've got some questions for you guys. Number one, are you cold?
Not anymore.
No, not anymore, because we're inside now. It was a little chilly outside, though, right? Yeah. Okay, we're going to move some stuff around, and I told you before, we have one of the top drivers at the old O'Hare Stadium, a fellow named Gene Marmor. Nobody was better. We've got him here. We've also got a fellow that ran Cadet Cars there, and we'll explain how the divisions work. But first of all, let's kind of move our stuff around a little bit. So if we would you guys please look over the camera? And the only mic we have is this one down here, so I'm going to have to do it like this, and please tell the folks.
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
It was quite a search, and we girls were glad the location is indoors. Now, let's return and find out a little about O'Hare Stadium from a real expert.
Joanna, do you have any idea what that model car represents?
No.
Okay, that is a model car of perhaps one of the biggest stars at the old O'Hare Stadium. As a matter of fact, the person that built that car is a personal friend of mine that was just a kid at the time, about 16 or 17 years old, that was abused by Gene Marmor. He went to work for Gene Marmor, and Gene Marmor had him working on his car, and he was there to learn, and Gene was there apparently to beat up on him, as I hear the story. But one of the things he did was he built an exact replica, and I mean exact in every detail. Chuck, if you can tilt down to that car again, if you can get that. Even the sponsors' names were correct. Everything was absolutely authentic, and we're talking about, I believe, 1962 or 63. We're going to find out, but it's really amazing we've got that piece left. Now, first of all, I want to come over here and take our audience out of suspense now after all this time. I said we were going to have Gene Marmor on the program, and I wasn't kidding, and our older motorsport fans will remember that Gene Marmor absolutely tore up the racetracks in the late 60s, I should say late 50s and early 60s. First of all, Gene Marmor, welcome to Motorsports Unlimited.
I appreciate being here.
Okay, great. Am I telling you about halfway correct? Have I got the time period right from about the late 60s?
Bit off. That car was built in 64, but the 63 was very similar.
Okay, so so you're saying that one was your 64 car?
That was a 64 car. They first started convertibles in 63, and that was a new version of 63, which is 64, you know.
As a matter of fact, you probably didn't know that I knew John Olson. John Olson and I have been friends for a long time, and that John told me a lot of stories about when he was just a kid. I assume he was about 17 in 64, so you must have been, what, in your 30s?
64, I'd be 34 years old.
Yeah, so you were kind of beating up on him pretty good.
Well, it's success by strife, you know.
In any event, this is not unusual in our community, in the motorsport community. John Olson, of course, himself went on to be quite a driver, and the way you learn those things is to latch on to a guy that's very talented and has capability and learn what he knows, and that's what he was there for, am I right?
Oh, that's true, and I see him from time to time, and I knew he was involved with you, you know.
Oh, okay.
Along. That's right.
So you kind of knew. Well, in any event, I want to talk a little bit. We're here, and as close as we can determine, we are in the conference room right now at Sloan Valve Company, and as close as we can determine, this is where the track used to be.
It's real close. I think that right behind us the track was, and then the surrounding parking lots are right in here.
You spent a lot of years here.
First opened in '56, and raced pretty consistent through '64. And then after that, I didn't race at O'Hare, probably maybe a little bit in '65.
So the track actually opened in what, 56 or 5?
56 was the first year, and '68 was the last year.
So we're talking about 12 years.
12 years.
Okay, and very few people, it's interesting because we stopped at the Air Host Motel across the street on Mannheim Road, and not any of the people there even knew there used to be a racetrack over here. We went to the hotel down the street from there, which is now called the Tokyo, I think it's a Tokyo Motel. They had never heard that there was a racetrack over here. We finally found the first guy we talked to at Northwest Ford didn't know it was a racetrack, but the second guy we found there actually did. It's amazing how that history is gone.
That's because they're too young, and that's why. You have to be old.
You have to be old, I suppose, but it's a shame. I don't want to see, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this program today, is I don't want to see those little pieces of history lost. I think that they're important. This was a very, very good facility. Banked, quarter-mile paved oval, if I'm not mistaken.
It was probably the best track in the Chicago area to race at.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we talked about this a little bit before, and there's a bunch of things that I want to talk about. First of all, did you ever win the track championship there?
3 times.
I told you this guy was big time, and I should probably remember that, although I only raced there, and I'm trying to remember, but it seemed to me 59 or 60, something, 61 maybe?
56 and 57 and 63.
Okay, and you also raced at Soldier Field?
Raced at Soldiers Field and a lot of other places in the Chicago area, too.
Okay, now the big question has to be, because anybody that has some familiarity with the history of these racetracks around here knows that Freddie Lorenz, that O'Hare Stadium was really his kind of home track. If I haven't got this right, please help me.
Well, it was. He started the first year they were open, and I think by 58 he won a championship here. And then he went on to USAC, and from USAC to NASCAR. So he went up to, he was the first $100,000 a year purse winner in USAC, or in NASCAR.
And started right here at O'Hare Stadium.
Started here, and I pushed him around a little bit.
Well, that's what I was going to ask if you were able to handle him back then, because, in fact, our regular viewers are going to maybe recognize the name Freddie Lorenz. I hope they will anyhow, because he actually lives in this area. And as a matter of fact, he was the first I'm saying it wrong. He was a Daytona 500 winner.
Yes, he was. And he said he wished he hadn't quit so soon. And it did a big write-up in one of the, I think the Tribune, just recently, that he wished he had stayed in it longer.
Okay, the question to you then, could you handle him?
Could I? Well, I handled him real good when he was here. And I handled him in Milwaukee, too.
Well, I want to find out one interesting thing here. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
64. And
at 64 years old, you still feel that competitive?
Well, my body won't handle it anymore. Too many aches and pains.
Well,
that's the biggest problem,
Yeah, well, there's no question about it that as we get a little bit older, one of the things that we learn is we don't heal so good anymore. It takes a little bit longer, and we get sore easier.
I was offered to ride in an old-timers race in Wisconsin, and I decided to turn it down. I didn't figure I wanted to hurt myself any more than I already have. I figured I'd cheated odds enough,
Did you fancy yourself, and again, I knew you, and this is almost a little bit difficult for me because this was one of my heroes from back then, along with a fellow named Bill Lutz and I'm sorry?
Whitey Gherkin.
Whitey Gherkin, who of course unfortunately lost his life at Ileana Speedway, but Whitey Gherkin was a big star here at O'Hare Stadium.
Eric Johnson, Roy Martinelli, Roy Zach, to name a few. And there was another one, and I didn't know the guy's name, but it was Lehman Brothers Towing, Lehman Brothers Trailers. Was it House Trailers or something? I don't think he ever really got on top real good.
Okay, but I'm trying to remember.
He was there, but maybe as an also ran.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember these names because this is going back a long time. And as I recall, and I want our audience to be clear about this, Gene Marmor, let me step over to the other side because I can't believe I'm blocking the pretty girls all this time. Sorry, girls. As I recall, you were known as one of the bad guys. Want to comment?
Well, that's great because if you're known as a bad guy, they won't fool with you.
Well, so you don't back away from that?
Oh, no. I said I had my crew dressed with black hats when the Dodge boys were wearing the white hats, and we wanted to be the bad guys rather than the good guys.
I often wondered back then because they had a pretty good announcer at the old O'Hare Stadium, and I don't really recall at this point who it was, but he used to play it up that Bill Lutz, who was also, I believe, a track champion, Bill Lutz was the good guy with the white hat and a good clean-cut driver, and of course there was that nasty Gene Marmor with his black car and black hats.
You're probably thinking of Ed 20 Grand Steinbeck.
That's the name. You're exactly correct. And he used to play it up big time.
He was a very good announcer, and well, he probably did that. I know that when Whitey Gherkin first started racing, I told him to call him Wild Bill Gherkin, and he didn't like that at all, so he changed it right away.
Is that right?
Don't call me Wild Bill, Wild Man, call me Whitey.
Give us an idea of how did you drive O'Hare Stadium? Was there a technique to it? And one of the things I want the audience to understand that was particularly important, in my opinion, about O'Hare, because it was a great track to watch races from, and I'm not sure if it was the design of the banking or the pavement or if it was an agreement among the drivers, but they had a passing technique at the old O'Hare Stadium, which is missing in today's racing. And that passing technique was that if you were behind a guy and you were faster and he didn't move, you gave him a tap. It made the car step out. It didn't seem to crash any of the cars, although I'm sure occasionally it did, but at least what I saw, it didn't seem to crash anybody. But you gave him a tap, the car stepped out to the next lane, you went underneath, and if the guy could tap you back and get back in front of you, that meant you weren't faster than him. Generally what happened was you would drop off and the other guy would kind of get away. Do you know what I'm talking about there?
Oh, absolutely. But mainly a drive by the seat of your pants.
But did the track itself, did the track itself contribute to making that work?
Well, I think the track was excellent design, and I used to be able to race it without destroying a car. You know, we'd had a fender bend, you know, and stuff like that, but we go to Rockford, and we call it Wreckford, because if you go there 3 times, 2 times you brought your car back with serious damage, and Rockford and O'Hare wasn't that way, you know.
No, it didn't seem to me exactly. My perception of it was they had furious racing activity there, and it was possible to pass. But the technique did require a little tap in the corner. If a guy didn't move, you had to remind him you were there. But it seemed to be accepted practice and didn't seem to wreck the cars.
It was an accepted practice, and it worked real well. So I don't, you know, some of these races today are very boring. You know, nobody passes anybody. Unless somebody really gets out of shape or makes a big mistake. It's a follow the leader type thing now. You know.
Yeah, you're exactly correct. And of course, in today's social circle among the drivers, it would be considered in very poor taste. And of course, we're talking about cars that are a lot more expensive now to be nailing them.
Well, one thing I'd like to add to it is we were all inverted starts at O'Hare and Soldiers Field, fast cars in the back. Now it's fast cars in the front.
And I personally like the inverted starts.
Oh, an inverted start's much more exciting than the other way around, you know. But the cars are so close today. There's, you know, ready-made race cars, and the difference maybe is in the driver, you know, and one mistake and then you're out of it.
You're exactly right, and this is a dilemma that most of the tracks face as far as how to line up the drivers, what to do with this. We would all like to see inverted starts where the fastest qualifying cars are in the back and the slowest qualifying cars are in the front because it makes more excitement for the spectators of watching the guys work their way through. This used to be possible years ago when you had a Gene Marmor who was maybe 2 seconds a lap quicker than the guy that was starting on the front row. But today you don't seem to have that difference. If you've got a field out there of 20 cars, they're within you know, a quarter of a second of each other. And the fast guy, it's not fair to him because he can't get to the front.
No, it makes it much more difficult to do it that way now than what it was then, because we had cars that were faster in the back and they could show their skill going through, you know.
And they could get through.
Well, get through or tap them out of the way.
Exactly. It was very exciting. It was a wonderful racetrack, and again, I raced there, you know, a bit myself. There's a couple things I want to do real quick though before, because we're going to look at some of the pictures you've got, and some of the memorabilia and all that. But I want to ask real quick, because I don't know you personally. Did you fancy yourself as a chassis man, or did somebody else do your chassis?
No, I always did my own cars, and once in a while, one time I was sold a car to Chapman, and I was very disappointed in the way it got handled, so I went back to owning and adjusting, and I had an adjustment in the car that I could adjust the car while I was going.
I thought that was illegal.
No, they didn't. They made it illegal eventually. Anything I think up new, they decided to make it illegal eventually, you know.
So you were the guy that came in with that porta power in there?
There's a sample of it on that little model. Yeah, oh no, I'd have a porta power. I had a ratchet.
Oh, you did?
Ratchet, and was connected to the screw on the right rear, and I could go bring it up, bring it down. And I didn't have to go in the pits and say to my pit crew, turn it this way, and or turn it that way. I did it myself, see.
Oh, that's great, being able to adjust it as the race progresses.
Well, a lot of times a car will just start in a feature race, and you'll have a car just right, you know, and then it'll develop what we call a push. That's where you turn the wheels and the car goes straight. And if you can adjust that one spring, you can take the push away, and then you can beat your competition.
Illegal at most tracks today.
No. Well, they made it. It wasn't then.
Right, but today it's illegal to be able to adjust the car from the driver's seat.
They stopped that. They say it takes away from your driving ability or whatever, you know.
Yeah, well,
they need to figure you need both hands on the steering wheel.
I don't think so. He certainly did. In any event, we were going to move stuff around here a little bit because I want to show you some pictures from back from those days and all that. And we've left poor Joanna out of this way too long. And on Motorsports Unlimited, you know that we don't keep the pretty girls out of the shots for very long at all. So if you would, Joanna, please tell the folks.
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
fascinating man who seems to have the same competitive spirit today that Bill said he illustrated 30 years ago. Now, before we go any further, let's meet the girls on today's program.
Hi, I'm Peggy O'Donnell.
I'm Joanna DiStefano.
And I'm Stacy Hager.
Thank you, girls. Now, let's return to the O'Hare Stadium racers and learn a little more.
Well, we've already met Gene Marmor, so now we're going to meet another player from the O'Hare Stadium. And you are?
My name is John Whiteside from Franklin Park.
Okay, Bill?
Well, you bailed out on me quicker than I thought you were if you would step right over here. What you really want to know is, was this guy able to handle Gene Marmor after all that I've just said about Gene? What do you think, could he?
I don't know. Gene was the bad guy.
Gene was the bad guy, but as a matter of fact, I got a feeling John didn't have to go near Gene because as I understand it, he ran in the cadet division, which is what I ran in, and if I am incorrect, please say so.
That's correct.
And what was the cadet division?
It was the learning division. You started off at low budget and did your bangs and bumps in that division and worked your way up to the upper divisions.
And how long did you run?
2.5, 3 years.
Okay, that's about the length of time that I ran at O'Hare also. And actually, I'm surprised we kind of don't know each other. We were kind of racing there at the same time. We were both in the cadet division. Interestingly enough, now, you're an employee of Sloan Valve.
Yes, I am. I'm the engineering manager.
And do you have any sense of guilt or anything that your facility is right where the track was?
Not at all, really. I guess it's like visiting an old home. Racing was like a culture. It wasn't a hobby. It was a culture. Everything centered around the race car.
Well, you're exactly right, of course. And in fact, a lot of the non-motorsport public doesn't really understand that it is, in fact, a community. I use the expression motorsport community all the time, and people often look at me and they'll say they don't quite follow that. And I say, well, if you were involved in racing, you'd understand we are a community and we do all know each other. How successful were you? Is that a fair question to ask?
It's a fair question, but I wasn't very successful. I was hard on equipment. I broke more than I finished.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you something else that was part of my experience from back then running a cadet car there. The idea of the cadet class was a little bit like some classes, they're calling them sportsman cars now at some tracks and everything. We call them cadet cars back at the old O'Hare days. And the idea was it was supposed to be a lower budget way of going racing. You were supposed to be able to take and use street tires on it and all that. The reality is what happened after a couple of years was that guys had Gene Marmor's old car, and they just, because now that car was dated and it wasn't acceptable for late model division, they would put it in the cadet division. So what you had was a full-blown late model car with street tires back on it. Do you remember those?
Yes, I did, and it was for the higher money guys.
Right, but
yes.
But what had happened is the cadet cars got expensive too.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Exactly. Gene, you probably weren't involved with any of the cadet stuff, right?
No, I wasn't, but the good get better and the better get best.
Okay, this guy, 64, still competitive as he was back then. Now, there's something I want to ask about. As I recall, back in those days, and again, I'm reaching back 30 years for this, we had a team of Martinelli and Johnson. And when I say a team, these were team cars. If I understood this correctly, Martinelli owned the cars, and Eric Johnson drove one, and Martinelli drove the other. And these guys actually had a little system going where they would, and this was in the late model division, where the one guy would block and the other guy would go out and win. Was there any truth to that, or was that just the announcer playing something else?
There was a lot of truth to it, and it worked pretty good for them when I wasn't around, but when I was around, I used to handle them pretty good.
As a matter of fact, we've got a couple of pictures of that, and Chuck, don't try to come in on these. We'll get these shots afterwards, but I want to make sure that we explain what exactly happened here. You can take a look at this. I believe this was the beginning of the incident, and we'll get a shot of it afterwards. Kind of tell our audience what's going on in that picture.
Well, this is a shot, it's the reaction, because prior to that, Johnson had spun me out, and this is after I spun Johnson out. And then in the same race, I went out to spin out his teammate, Roy Martinelli.
Okay, and I want the audience to notice that on the car that has a number 7, the 7 car, there's a leg in the number 7, a girl's leg, obviously, but also if you notice the scallop paint job, and I can tell you, because I'm doing this from memory, that it was a red and white car, and it was a scallop paint. Am I correct?
It was red and white, and they had this leg on it that looked like a number 7, or vice versa. 7 looked like a leg.
Right, and the interesting thing about it was the other car, the Johnson car, if that was the Martinelli car or the Johnson
Please
one?
notice the name Dexter on the fender.
Car, I believe,
this
was
will
an
become important in the 2008 War
yeah.
of Wills car show.
Same color.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you to comment on this particular picture, which I understand is later, within minutes of that other one. Tell our audience what we're looking at here. You don't have to show it to the camera because we're going to take the shot afterwards.
This is after I took the other team car out in the same feature race, and then I was stalled, and he ran into me about 3 times, and I got out, and he ran across the hood, and I'm catching him in midair, and it was kind of a little bit of a wrestling match, but I was barred for 2 weeks after that, and so were they.
Yes, as a matter of fact, so the audience knows what they're looking at. In the picture that you're seeing, we've got the checkered shirt is Gene Marmor, and it looks like that's Martinelli coming over the car, coming after you?
It's Martinelli, and I was warned before the race started that they were going to do something that they would probably get thrown out for, so it did come to pass.
Okay, now we're looking at it 30 years back. 30 years later, you got barred for 2 weeks, they got barred for 2 weeks. Was it worth it?
Sure, I'd do it again.
That's unbelievable. 64 years old, you're not going to back up a step. I also want to talk just a little bit here, and pardon me if we walk past you, because I'm sure that you probably, as a cadet driver there, you must have had a great deal of admiration for this guy, too.
Oh, yes, I knew him quite well, and he was the guy to catch.
Boy, no question about it. And again, I used to look back at those times. I was trying to, believe this or not, folks, and I know our motorsport knowledgeable audience is going to understand this. When I built my stock car and started racing there, I had never heard the word stagger, had no idea what it meant. Can you imagine a guy going out on a racetrack like that?
Yeah, it's unusual terminology, yes.
Yeah, but to not even know something like that existed and try to go around a racetrack, do you think it can be done?
It can be done various different ways. You don't have to stagger. You're talking about tire stagger?
Yeah, but I think that...
Or stagger in general. You know, I mean, the cars are biased so that they can get through the turn better.
Right. Well, the point I was trying to make was that I had so little knowledge that I look back now, and I can't believe I even attempted it. And yet, at that time, I thought I was going to go out there and really do some business. And it obviously didn't work out that way.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I want to just back up just a little bit, and I want you to tell our audience what we're looking at here. I'm trying to start at the beginning. We'll start with this one and tell the folks, again, you don't have to show it to the camera. We'll take the shot afterwards.
Well, this is the year 1947, and it was a 32 Ford frame with a 47 Ford engine that was hopped up, and camshaft and carburetors, and a 30 Model A body that was, the roof was cut off, and we started racing those at Soldiers Field in 47.
Okay.
Just that fashion.
Okay, and then this one?
Well, that's a year later. It's the same car that tried to make it look a little better, and chopped it down and brighten it up, and again at Soldiers Field we were racing then.
Okay, now who was running the Soldier Field operation?
Andy Granatelli was later famed Mr. STP. He wore the trench coat, and he said he would give it the racer's edge with STP.
Now, as a matter of fact, I'm sure you guys have heard of Andy Granatelli?
No, I haven't.
You have not really?
No.
Peggy?
They're too young.
Oh, I can't. Wait a minute. That's not possible. Joanna, Andy Granatelli? You've never heard of him?
No.
The guy that kissed Mario Andretti in a winner's circle at the Indy 500?
Never heard of him.
Oh, I thought everybody would recognize the name. This is terribly difficult for me.
It's interesting for me to see these old pictures and how the cars were and things.
Well, I'll tell you something that's even more interesting is how things don't really change. I just for a moment want you to describe what this picture is, and what I want the audience to focus on here is the guys in the car.
Okay, these are all friends of mine. In fact, I think 3 of them I went to grammar school with, and this is a car that I had bought. It was a 32 chopped and channeled Ford 3-window coupe, and it was the forerunner to my first car that I raced at Soldiers Field. I took that body off and put the other body on because they wanted a top on the car, and I didn't want to ruin this top. So okay. That's 1947.
Okay, so we're looking at guys working on race cars, stock cars, if you will.
I was 17 years old then.
Okay, we're looking at guys in the late 40s working on their race car, and I happen to have a personal picture of my own here from the late 50s, and I want the audience to just take a look at this, and what I will describe, this is me and a couple of friends of mine, Dave Dixon and Herbie Horn, that were working on my stock car. You know, it doesn't change, does it? Just the style of the car changes, but the guys still look the same.
They look pretty much the same. In fact, you could almost pass for brothers.
Like gangsters. We all look like gangsters, and we're rather proud of that, too, as a matter of fact. Okay, you didn't back away at all, then, from being the bad guy, for being played up as a bad guy. And I understand there's a little bit of a story as to how you got that reputation of somebody that you spun out and thought of, or somebody that spun you out, and you thought about it over the winter and came back and spun them out at the beginning of the next season, or do I have it totally wrong?
No, yeah, they used to say that I had a memory like an elephant, and if I didn't get them this season, I'd get them next season. So then they didn't mess with me. That was what I liked, to keep the reputation of being a bad guy.
So you thought it was of value to you, that it was sort of intimidating?
Yeah, definitely. You know.
And that's why the black car and all that?
Well, that went hand in glove. I like black.
Okay. Now, I've got to ask John. Yes, Peggy?
He doesn't seem like a bad guy to me.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. It sounds to me like what he is a smart guy, and it's a cover.
It's a cover. It's a cover.
It's one of those things, you use this to your advantage. If you got guys thinking that they better not touch your car, maybe they'll stay behind you instead of passing you when maybe they could pass you. Am I right?
Well, it's more of a thing that you do a bad turn to me and you're going to get it back.
Okay, so you weren't kidding.
This year, it'll be next year.
Yes.
So these spinouts were deliberate?
Oh, that happened. The ones that we just talked about before, the ones that we showed you the pictures of, it was deliberate because apparently Martinelli and Johnson, as I understand the story, Martinelli and Johnson had indicated ahead of the race that they were going to take care of Gene Marmor. And apparently Gene Marmor did in fact get taken care of, but didn't just walk away with his tail between his legs, went back on the racetrack and took both of those guys out and ended up in a fight. Am I close?
You were right on, right on.
So, yeah, that's how that all came about.
It's like a demolition derby.
Yeah, but with very expensive, full-blown late-model stock cars and everything. And it's something you don't see a lot of today anymore with public relations people in the game and all that sort of thing. They, of course, advise guys against that.
Well, it still happens, but they frown on it, you know.
Yeah.
It happened at Indianapolis, the one that was on TV just recently, that who's the guy I'm thinking of? The three brothers are racing, and they're spinning each other out at Indianapolis at Bodine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. The Bodine brothers, talking about the stock car racing.
Yeah, they spun each other out, and that wasn't very nice, and that's a multi-million-dollar thing there, you know.
Multi-million-dollar deals. In any event, we've got, again, we've talked a little bit about the history of this thing, and when O'Hare, you were racing, if I understand this correctly, you were racing at Soldier Field, and as a matter of fact, we had a whole list of tracks that you raced at. You raced literally at all the tracks in the area.
Just about all of them.
And John, did you race only at O'Hare?
No, I raced at Raceway Park in Santa Fe, but on occasions, mostly at O'Hare.
Okay. Now, I want to take a break here for a moment because I want to indulge myself a little bit. Some of our regular viewers know that I had written a book some time ago, and don't try to go out and get it because it's not published. But there were a couple little pieces in there about O'Hare Stadium, and I want to share them with you, and then we're going to go back and talk with these guys a little bit more. Let's see, Joanna, you do this last time, right? So now we're down here with Peggy. Please tell the folks.
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
We found it interesting that all the things Gene, John, and Bill were talking about happened some 30 to 35 years ago, right on the spot in which we were standing. Few remember there was even a track there. Let's go back and join Bill for his earliest recollection of O'Hare Stadium.
It was a warm summer evening, and I had arrived at a now-defunct O'Hare Stadium with my freshly completed stock car. Getting there had been as tough a battle as building my car. I was only 17, and I had the somewhat common situation of my parents being totally opposed to my involvement in racing. Consequently, I had to build the thing on the sly. This included renting a garage, as my parents didn't have one and wouldn't have let me use it for racing purposes if they did. It's not easy to go to high school and work enough hours part-time to finance even a low-buck effort as well as have the time to work on it. I wouldn't even consider trying it now at age 40, by the way, folks, that was some 10 or 11 years ago, with a complete welding and machine shop at my disposal. But you do things like that when you're 16 and you don't know that you can't. Somehow it gets done. Sort of. Anyway, we were looking over the car to see how well it had survived the 20-mile journey. We were discussing how hard it would be to build a tow bar. We had towed it with a tow rope. That was a little short. The tow rope that was a little short, causing us to bang into the tow car a few times during the jaunt to the track. Closely inspecting the tow car, we determined that the damage was slight and we would have to be more careful on the way home. Besides, it was worth it. What a great evening. We felt like big shots when we were directed by the parking lot personnel to the pit road. This evening was like many fine summer race nights. The hot afternoon sun had been replaced by warm evening breezes. The odor at the racetracks have always been intoxicating to me. The fresh rubber, the high-octane fuels, the trick lubricants mixing with the smell of freshly mowed fields surrounding the pits. Then, of course, the sharp report of the first motors being fired up. The guys that get there early and always got the good pit stops still bug me. In any event, it made your blood pump hard and wish the sign-up line would move faster. Oh yes, my loss of innocence. As I got closer to my turn to sign up, I became aware that they charge you to race. Before this, I had done some drag racing, and of course you paid there. There were no spectators, just participants. This was 1959 after all, and professional drag racing and spectators were still to come. It seemed to me that professionals would be paid to perform. After all, we were the show that the spectators came to see. It seemed to me that this was like the band paying the lounge owner to let them perform. Well, everyone else was paying, so I knew they weren't just trying to hustle the new guy. Besides, more engines were running now, and I was anxious to get on the track, and I figured I would win the money back easily. Naturally, I made nothing. During the ensuing season, I learned many things besides how to make a race car work. I discovered that there was no way one could pay for the racing with the prize money available. At first, it seemed as soon as I learned what I was doing, I'd be in the money line. Just a matter of paying my dues. As time went by, the facts of stock car racing life slowly began to sink in. To win, or to be a serious threat, much, 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 much more money would have to be spent. Well, I think you can see that I have a fondness in my heart for the old O'Hare Stadium, and yes, I did learn a number of things there, including you really can't do this unless you're rich. It was terrible, and we're going to talk to Gene and John a little bit about that too and see if they experienced the same thing. In any event, I hope that was a little bit instructive. This, as I said, is a book that I had written some 10, 11 years ago, something like that, and it really has never been published, but it was a piece there about O'Hare, and I wanted you to hear it. So now we're going to get back to the guys, in fact, one of the big guys at the track, and talk a little bit about if he could relate to that being one of the big guys. So if you would, Stacy, please tell the folks.
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
Okay, Bill, let's see if Gene Marmor and John Whiteside remember it the same way.
Guys, that little piece that I just read actually was about, it was a little bit about O'Hare Stadium, but what it was more about was the costs of racing and the outrageous costs of racing. And I often hear guys today, when they talk about it, it is true, like to build a new late model dirt car is going to cost you $50,000, and a top flight first class engine is about $30,000 a pop. And I hear guys saying that it was so much cheaper back in your days when you did it and all that. Well, it is my position it wasn't any cheaper back then. We're talking about Chinese dollars. I remember well that back at O'Hare Stadium, the hot ticket, and this might not have been true in your case, Gene, because you were kind of a builder yourself, so you didn't need a lot of outside help. But the hot ticket was a Traco Chevy engine, and what you did was you took your engine, gave it to Traco, along with, I believe, $5,000, and you got back a Traco Chevy, and that was the horsepower.
That would be about $40,000 in 2007 money.
I don't know of too many people using a Traco back then.
Okay,
it maybe was later, you know, but not in the early in the 50s when we were talking about the 50s.
Well, I'm talking about late 50s, early 60s.
Well, I never used one.
No, I know you kind of build your own stuff.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely did.
Yeah, but you know the guys were using the Traco engines.
No.
No, okay, because that was the ticket. The rumor down to us guys at the cadet level was some of those big time late model guys had Traco Chevy engines, much like people maybe have Gertie engines today.
There's always rumors, and you know they had these Key-K-for Chryslers that were running in Milwaukee, and they said they had aluminum bodies, and they had this and they had that, and some of it was true and some of it wasn't, you know.
Well, let me find out from a guy that was back in my ranks that probably knew it. John, what did you think? Did those guys, big guys, have those Traco Chevys?
I thought they did.
Yeah, you bet they did. I have a feeling Gene is.
Right.
Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah. Well, wait, this guy still. You're not going to let it go. You don't think so?
No, I don't think so. But there's a possibility. So a couple of them did, you know.
Trust me, one of the reasons these guys went fast is because they had these Traco Chevy engines, and they were $5,000 a piece, and that's one of the reasons they went so fast.
I didn't have $5,000 in my whole car.
Okay, the point I was going to make though was, okay, so it was $5,000 for a Traco Chevy back then, and today it's $30,000 for a Gertie engine or a Ryan engine or something like that. However, back in those days, a guy with a really good job was making $5,000 or $6,000 a year, and today a guy with a really good job is maybe making $30,000, $35,000. So it was a year's salary.
Yeah, it's relative. It's gotten out of hand in the last 8-10 years. It's just ridiculous. How if you got money, you can buy speed. You know, back then you could innovate and make it work.
Okay, I'm not sure if I would agree with that, but I'm not going to say no to Gene Marmor, because I do think that even back then money talked. The guys that could buy the good motors and buy the good parts and all that could do it. Although I do know that your reputation was one of making do with factory parts and doing some innovation and all that. You agree with that?
I could make stuff work for a little amount of money, and where everybody else thought they had to spend a big buck, you know.
Exactly, and actually there are still some examples of people today that do pretty well on relatively low bucks, but I think if you want some real assurance of doing well today, you've got to go out and spend the money, John?
Yes, you do. You can't make it yourself, but you can buy it if there's other people out there specializing in that stuff.
Right, and the thing, and I don't know if you picked up on it, that I was talking about in that piece, it was like a loss of innocence for me the first time I went to O'Hare Stadium. That was my first stock car racing years ago, and I built the car myself in the garage. As I indicated earlier, I had never even heard the word stagger. I had no idea what that stuff was. The only thing I could see by those cars that I saw on the racetrack, the only thing I could see was that the right front wheel was canted in at the top a little bit. So I took and moved my A-frame over and canted it. You probably did the same thing with yours?
Some ridiculous amount. It shouldn't have been that much, but it looked dramatic.
Those of us in the cadet class, we exaggerated everything we saw.
Yes, we did.
Because if a little bit was good, a lot.
Fair.
Exactly. So we sort of exaggerated it. So we had the wheel canted over. Other things I did, I remember I made my own wheels because I saw what the big guys had. They had real racing wheels. As a matter of fact, there was a fella on Western Avenue who since has become very big time, a fellow named Bob Boyce in Boyce Engineering today. At that time, he had a little place on Western Avenue, and he started making real racing wheels. The first real ones that I ever saw. My own version of it was I looked at it and I went to the junkyard and got the widest wheels I could find, then drilled the welds out, turned the centers around so the wide part would be the outside, welded them back together again, but there's no way. I'm sure you know they're not straight now, right?
No, they're not straight at all.
No.
And they last about 10 laps.
Yeah, exactly. And they weren't straight at all. So I looked at it. I said, well, there's got to be a way to keep these things from breaking up. So I went and welded on big pieces of channel iron that would have, if they'd had rules back then, they wouldn't have never let me run because it would cut other guys' tires up, no question about it. But they let me run. But the interesting thing about it was I had to tow out from Chicago on the Kennedy Expressway. And what would happen is that the wheels shook so bad that they'd work all the lug nuts loose and ovaled the holes on the wheels by the time. Does you relate to any of this, John? Because I know Gene doesn't.
Yes, I do. I had the same budget you had, it sounds like, about $35 a week or a month, something like that. And we had trouble getting it there, and we had more trouble getting it back, particularly if we didn't crash. You know, if we crashed, you didn't get it back. You had to fix it there.
Exactly. In fact, we thought it was a big jump when I finally constructed a tow bar because I was forced in. I was using a tow rope for a while, and the guy that was towing was getting mad because we were knocking the back of his car up pretty good. And so we got a tow bar working. This is all the way out on the Kennedy Expressway. And the main reason it forced me to do it was because the tow car, I had to use my own tow car then. This guy didn't want to get banged up anymore. I used my own tow car, and the tow car would overheat on the way out. So the way we did it was we fired up the stock car, pushed the tow car all the way up to Kennedy. When we swung off on the Manheim exit, we'd fire up the tow car again and drag it down to. You can relate to it?
I can relate to that, yes. Many times the police used to stop us and say, get that thing off the street. You know?
Absolutely. Gene, what about yourself? Or you guys were bigger time.
I had a Skinner Brothers Pontiac and a car hauler with a car on top of it, and I pushed the whole thing back with the car and the tow bar from Charlotte, North Carolina.
So you did it too then?
All the way from there, all the way out here.
I don't know if our non-motorsport audience can just appreciate the difficulties that we go through in order to race. And you're right, crash the car. If you've got a tow bar or a rope, as I did, I think I was the only guy that did that, you crashed. There was no getting it home.
No, there was. You had to fix it on the spot. You take the
hire a tow truck. Hire a tow truck to get you home.
There was no budget for hiring any tow trucks.
No money at all for that.
No, that would have been a bunch of guys with tow ropes the next day trying to drag the pieces home. There wouldn't have been any hiring tow trucks. In any event, I want to talk a little bit about the technology of the cars at that time. Gene, I'm going to start with you. Today, of course, we're talking about Rayburn chassis. We're talking about Bullitt chassis. We're talking about Masters-built chassis. And for that matter, if we're talking about pavement cars, maybe we're talking about left-hander. Maybe we're talking about, I'm trying to think of the Tri-City, help me, the Howe cars. Mm-hmm. All of them build specialized chassis for these short-track cars. Didn't have it at that time.
No, we had stock cars that were cars that either you got them off the street or off the junkyard, and the parts all had to be stock, and you modified them a little bit to your own satisfaction, but they were stock. Now they're anything but stock.
That's right. As a matter of fact, the rules called for, if you had, for example, if you were running a Ford always had leaf spring cars. If you were running a Ford, it better have leaf springs underneath there, or it was an illegal car. If you had a Chevy from the later era, I'm trying to think when they went to the coil springs, you had to have I'm sorry?
1958, they went to coil springs.
So if you had a 59 or 60 Chevy or something, you'd have coil springs, or it was an illegal car.
That's right.
That's right. And you seem to feel that the 57 Chevy, which was still a leaf spring car, was the ideal chassis.
Oh, you didn't have to do hardly anything to it, and it worked good, you know, and a lot of drivers put late model bodies on the 57s till they couldn't get away with it no more, you know.
Exactly. Now, in addition to that, something else happened to that you guys probably weren't even aware of it, but at the time, I remember when I built my first stock car, the orange number 68, when I built that, the roll bar was strictly a roll bar, that if we rolled the car, it had to meet the rules of what the roll bar had to be, met the rules, so if you rolled the car over, the top wouldn't crush in on you. But what you guys were doing, and I think you sort of created it, was you made the roll cage part of the chassis.
Oh yeah, they started to integrate the roll bar to stiffen the chassis up and lend strength to the whole thing, and then they decided to put more bars in for protection on the driver's door and on the right side, and then eventually it evolved into the hybrid chassis that you have today that are rectangular tubing or square tubing and probably round roll bars, but there's no part of but today's cars are unibody anyway, so you can't even get a car with a chassis no more.
Exactly, that's the point. The technology of the manufactured automobiles have changed, and also we've changed as to what the race cars do. But back then when we were running at O'Hare, you were required to have it be, if it was a coil spring car, it had to be a coil spring car, and you had to have the stock chassis. Now, you guys did something else that I looked at too, and maybe we can get the secrets out now because it doesn't make any difference anymore. I watched a lot of you guys, you had something going from the left rear corner of the chassis through the roll cage to the right front corner. As I understood it, this is so if you got tapped, it didn't spin you out, it transferred the energy to the right front wheel.
Well, all that really was to stiffen the chassis so it wouldn't flex so bad, and lose the whatever springing ahead there, and it would, from the right front to the left rear, would maintain the stability of it,
It wasn't for absorbing the shock of being tapped?
Well, I suppose it served that purpose too, but that it was to overall stiffen the car up, So it didn't flex so bad because most of the time it took the body panels out and that in turn weakened the structure because the body was tied into the chassis, so you had to put something else in there to take the place of it.
As a matter of fact, you were telling me, and I should tell our audience, that when you built I think it was your 63 Chevy car, which is a car that's got to weigh in stock configuration, it's got to be upwards close to 4,000 pounds.
They're close. They're probably 3,800, and mine was about 2,480 was gas in it.
What do you think, Joanna? 2,400 pounds from a car that starts out almost 4,000 pounds. Would you think there's some things missing?
Yeah.
So we had to stiffen the chassis.
It was just a shell of a body with it had a stock chassis in it with some roll bars and some tubing to stiffen it. That worked good.
John, what did you run as a cadet car?
I ran a 53 Ford Flathead, and then later I had a 55 Chevy with a small block.
Boy, you were big time then.
Semi-big time. I couldn't afford a quick change rear end or nothing that.
Well, but wait a minute now. If you had a car in the cadet class that already had a stock from the factory, an overhead valve V8 engine, that was pretty big time as far as
big time. Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah, because I can tell the audience a little secret as they look at the orange car, my original stock car and everything. It started out life as a 53 Mercury, and I knew there was no hope with the old Flathead, and I had access to a 56 Buick engine, so I put a 56 Buick engine into it, which was obviously a lot stronger, a lot more powerful than what should have been there. And I took it out there, and I was worried about two things, particularly in that first sign-up day. I was concerned that they would catch the Buick engine in there, which was totally illegal, although today nobody bats an eye at any of that stuff. But today, it was, yes, then it would have been totally illegal. But in addition to having a Buick engine in this little Merc, and a Merc, by the way, was not, at that time, was nothing more than a Ford that had heavier-duty parts. For example, the right front was taper roller bearings instead of ball bearings, so you could live with the Merc front end. But in any event, so I had the Buick engine in there. And I was concerned about getting caught because I was only 17, and you're supposed to be 18 to race, and I was only 17. I was now looking back, anybody that would have thrown the money up on a counter, they've been glad to take them, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was concerned about getting caught for having the Buick engine. I was also and for getting caught for being too young. So after racing it that way for a couple days, and a couple of weeks, guys were kind of coming around looking at the car and everything. I said, boy, I'm going to get caught. So I welded Ford valve covers onto the Buicks. The Buicks had kind of a vertical valve cover arrangement, so I welded some Ford valve covers on a little bit of an angle in order to try to pass it off, and then I registered it as a 54 Ford because that was when they came out. You remember this?
That was an overhead car. Yeah, well, not a very good one, but it was an overhead engine, yes.
Exactly. And so I said to myself after a while, I had a couple guys look at me and says, Bill, I ain't going to say anything, but that's not a Ford engine in there. So then I came up with another plan. I went and torched some portholes with a welding torch into the fenders of the car to try to pass the car off as a Buick. Well, nobody was buying that, so I had to go to the junkyard and buy a bunch of Buick sheet metal, and it didn't fit on the Ford at all. They were bigger. Buick was a much bigger car. Do you relate to any of this, though?
Yes, Saturday afternoon was spent in the junkyards. Yeah, trying to find your spindles, your new bearings, or you get old bearings, put them in there anyhow, as long as they were good.
I'll tell you what, almost everything on the car, including the tires, was from the junkyard. You just go there and find the biggest tires you could from the junkyard to use in the cadet class. I know you guys didn't do that because you guys had those nice...
Proven ones from the junkyard, you know it works.
Well, you're right, we know it works. And as a matter of fact, I wrote a little piece about it in my book, too, the piston. I blew a piston on my Buick engine. And can you imagine today, anybody, I look back and I can't believe I did it. I got a piston out of a car in the junkyard. Now, for those that have been into engines, in the junkyard, all you've got with you is what you can carry in a little toolbox to go to actually pull a piston out of it. It took me like 7 hours, and I was at the old Atomic Junkyard. If you remember that, do you remember it? Everybody's nodding?
Yeah, what we used to do there is you go to Atomic Junkyard on the bridge and you drop a string down the side. Then you get the part you want, the transmission, tie it to the rope, tie it to the transmission, and at night you go pull the string up and get the transmission.
What he's talking about, folks, is that the old Atomic Junkyard was on Damon Avenue in Chicago, right next to the Chicago River. So the Damon Avenue kind of went up as it went over the river, and there was a big concrete drop-off, and the guys hung lines over it, tied things to it.
Previously Friedman Auto Record before it was Atomic.
Was it really?
It was. They adopted Atomic because of World War II. They adopted the name Atomic.
Okay, so you guys are all familiar with this place?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I thought maybe you were suburban. Yes,
You
Peggy.
guys really did whatever it takes to get these parts.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I applaud you for that. That's excellent.
And we were all like this. It wasn't anything special. We were all, whatever it took to get it done. So we had the 50, so I got a piston out. It took me like 8 hours to get that piston out of the engine. And I finally went to the window at the end of the night, the window, the counter, and the guy said, "You actually got a piston out of an engine? Get out of here, take it with you. I don't care." Didn't even charge me for it. I was so happy. But apparently this is all stuff you did.
Oh, yes. We used to accumulate a lot of the flathead engines when the guys would change from the flatheads to the Chevys. They put them in their cars. I would get those old engines, and I'd have about 6 of them in my garage. And I'd run one a week and blow it up, throw it away, and get another one.
Okay, big question from this period. Did you enjoy it, Gene?
Oh, absolutely. You could make it work, and you didn't have to spend a ton of money. That's what's great about it.
How about yourself, John?
It was an ongoing challenge every day. I enjoyed it, yes.
I enjoyed it thoroughly, and we were getting some kind of a wrap-up sign. I don't think we're at the end of the program. I think we've got more, so we must be at the end of the tape. And Joanna, I think we're back to you, so if you would, turn yourself and please tell the folks.
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
Bill was shocked to learn that we were indeed almost out of time, and we hadn't even talked about the Volkswagen racing at O'Hare.
What you have just been looking at is a shot of the Volkswagen racing that they did at O'Hare Stadium. And as a matter of fact, and Chuck, you don't have to go back to it, we'll show it again. I want everybody to notice that number 68 car in the front happens to be me. I did a little bit of that, and it was one of my efforts to try to control costs. In fact, it was their effort to try to control costs on racing. And this was just before the place closed. And I want to ask Gene again, please. It opened when and closed when?
56 was the first year, and 68 was the last.
68 was the last year, so this was just before the place closed, and I want to tell the audience that I drove that car to the racetrack, took the muffler off, threw the back seat on the ground, threw the passenger seat on the ground, we raced it and put the stuff back in and drove it home, and I think it went on for about, maybe 6 months or a year, something like that. Anyhow, we've got a couple new players up here that I want to introduce, and first of all, you are?
Lynn Carlson.
And Lynn, you are involved with Gene.
Right.
Okay, now are you intimidated by this guy?
Not at all.
You know something? Somehow I don't doubt it. Now down at this end over here, please introduce yourself, or I should say reintroduce yourself to the audience.
Don Marmar, Gene's son.
Exactly, and our audience is going to remember I wanted him, he's been sitting here the whole time, I wanted him to make sure that he showed himself to our audience because regular race fans know that you were involved with a horrendous crash 6 years ago this weekend.
Exactly.
Exactly 6 years ago, and where was it?
Atlanta, Georgia, my favorite racetrack.
Boy, I bet you can remember that. And it was a race, it was an accident that everybody thought no one could survive, and not only did he survive, but apparently you're doing fine.
Doing real good, and I can thank dear God for it.
This guy. And you guys ran the first automatic transmission out
We
there?
built the first automatic transmission to
We
run in a race
mentioned
car
Dexter
back in
earlier.
1963.
He was the artist
Okay,
who
well,
lettered
listen,
most
I'm
of
gonna
the
tell
top
you something.
late
These guys were
models at
innovators,
O'Hare. He went
very,
on to
very, very
become one of
successful.
the
I
most
hope you've
famous
enjoyed
motorsport artists in the
this
Midwest.
program
All of
taped
these artists
right
are
on
going to be
location
honored at
of
the
the old O'Hare
2008
Stadium. I certainly
World
enjoyed
of
my
Wills
years
Car
there. This
Show.
doesn't seem quite the same, but I assure you that it is. And Lynn, can I put you to work for one moment?
Sure.
Okay, I'd like you to look at our camera, and I'd like you to say,
Don't go away, folks. We'll be right back.
We hope this little walk down memory lane has jogged a few memories in some and educated others. O'Hare Stadium was a wonderful track that's missed by many.
While this show wasn't about Dexter, he was a major player at O'Hare Stadium, and as the coming weeks unfold, you'll see why Bill wanted to remind you about the old O'Hare Stadium. You'll see. This is all going to come together at the 2008 World of Wheels Car Show. Now let's take just a moment to acknowledge those who helped make this updated show possible. Our webmaster, Frank Barbalet, Art Lauschat,
Of course, we have
May
to take a moment
10,
to thank the stars
Samantha
of this edition
Bentley,
of Motorsports Unlimited.
and me,
Peggy
I'm
O'Donnell,
Janine Lauscha.
Joanna DiStefano, Stacy Hager, and our host, Bill Wildt. Me, Clarence Barnes. Taking just a moment to thank the Sloan Valve Company for allowing us to tape this little piece of history on their premises. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching.
Girls, what's going on?
Actually, Bill, the people from Sloan sent over this aerial view of the old stadium, and we were trying to figure out where we were when we did our shoot.
Ah, yes, I know about this. Let's face the music with the audience. In fact, I'm sure some of our knowledgeable viewers that attended O'Hare Stadium said, nah, they weren't exactly where the track was. It turns out we were about 100 yards further south of the actual racetrack itself. We were on the O'Hare Stadium premises, but a little bit south. As a matter of fact, let me point out, we were taping in this conference room right about here in the building, which is about 100 yards further south. And I want to thank the folks at Sloan, by the way. They found out how important this was to us, and they went and dug through their archives and found this old aerial photograph. Obviously, it was a photograph of their building, but the track still happened to exist at that time and was in the background. As a matter of fact, the silo is very obvious. The silo is still there, so it's a good marker. And where the track is showing in this particular picture is all buildings now. I went and looked at it. There's one, it's like an industrial building with several different companies, and one was Pac Tech, I believe it is. They make stuff for, how would you say, for amusement games, things that design and build stuff like that. Anyhow, it's all buildings, so it's no longer a racetrack or anything like that. So I'm really, actually, I really appreciate the fact that they provided this this picture for us so we can accurately locate it. So we were about 100 yards south of where the O'Hare Stadium track was, and we're out of time. Say goodbye to the folks.
This program made possible in part by support from Midwest Muscle Car Parts, located on Joliet Road and 47th Street in Lyons, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Bridgestone Firestone and your local Bridgestone Firestone tire retailers.
This program made possible in part by support from Copy That, located in the County Farm Plaza at County Farm Road and Army Trail Road in Carroll Stream, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
This program made possible in part by support from PB Food Products, located on 47th Street at Western Avenue in Chicago, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from J.C. Whitney & Company, located just off I-80 at the Utica exit in LaSalle, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grant Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
This program made possible in part by support from the Chicagoland Toys for Tots Motorcycle Parade, held on Western Avenue in Chicago, the first Sunday in December. Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com, or you can write to Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois, 60666. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please let us know what you think.
Next week on Motorsports Unlimited, well, that sound coming from a car can only mean Larry Claypool, and that's him. He's driving a two-stroke DKW. But that's only one of the weird cars he's going to show us next week on Motorsports Unlimited. Cool sound, huh?
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And keep on rocking.